Good morning, everybody. Today's proceedings will be live streamed after a 15-minute delay. Those with mobile telephones may use them to report what they hear in the hearing room, but only after 15 minutes have elapsed since the event that they're reporting. They may not be used for recording or photography. My understanding is that at Lord Condon's request, we will rise every hour for 10 minutes.
I'm relaxed, Chairman. If longer sessions make the day more productive, I am in your hands.
Thank you very much indeed. But like all witnesses, your welfare is one of my primary concerns, and I'm anxious to ensure that you are not put under unavoidable stress.
Thank you, Chairman.
Right. Yes.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Please, could you give us your full name?
Paul Leslie Condon.
And are the contents of your witness statement to this inquiry, dated the 3rd of March 2025, true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
Before I ask any further questions, I understand that you would like to make an apology.
Chairman, I would like to apologise and endorse the apologies of the current Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley. I personally apologise for every single person who has been damaged by the actions of officers in the Special Demonstration Squad over the decades. And I am appalled by so much of what I have learnt throughout this inquiry. And I sincerely apologise to every single person who has been damaged in this process.
I'd like to start with some of your background in the police before we get to your appointment as Commissioner. And I want to take you back in the first instance to 1979. I understand from your witness statement that at that stage you were working for the Community Relations Branch, A7. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
In broad terms, how did A7 monitor community relations?
A7 had community relations officers in the field at the rank of Chief Inspector and Superintendent, largely borough-based, whose task primarily was to foster good community relations within each of those boroughs. And then there was a central team in Scotland Yard, of which I was a part, which helped to shape and influence policy for the Commissioner.
When you were serving in A7, was A7 receiving intelligence from Special Branch?
My rank was Chief Inspector, and I cannot remember any occasion when Special Branch information was conveyed to me or to my colleagues, to my knowledge.
You tell us in your witness statement that as part of your duties in A7, you were the secretary to the police investigation into the death of Blair Peach.
Yes, a young man called Blair Peach died during the violence at a demonstration in Southall, and there were allegations made at the time that...
I can stop you there. We're very familiar with the death of Blair Peach
Yes.
and the inquiry, and we've heard evidence
Yes.
about it.
Yes, so I was appointed by the then Commissioner, Sir David McNee, to be secretary to the inquiry that the Home Secretary asked him to conduct. And over a process of days and weeks, I ran that inquiry, wrote the report, and I used the term generally secretary to the inquiry.
And you tell us in your witness statement that you also wrote a confidential report recommending that the Special Patrol Group be disbanded.
Yes, I did. The Special Patrol Group had a growing reputation for being involved in heavy-handed policing, and it was a central unit that had no particular allegiance to individual boroughs. In my view, it was doing harm to the public and to the reputation of policing, and I recommended a system of local officers based within boroughs to fulfil that role under the command of local officers, and that was implemented.
And so from that work, I can take it that you are very familiar with the circumstances surrounding Mr. Peach's death, including the demonstration in which he was fatally injured.
I was at the time, yes.
Can I take you, please, to MPS 301219? Now, this is a much later report. I'm going to show you, it's a Special Demonstration Squad report. It's dated the 28th of July, 1998, so whilst you were Commissioner. The intelligence source touchy subject, that is the code name for an SDS officer. I'll give you a moment to read the text.
I have read that, yes.
If this document had been drawn to your attention at the time in 1998, would it have caused you any concern that an undercover officer was reporting on preparations for the 20th anniversary demonstration?
The only justification could be if there was a belief or a substantial concern that the event could lead to serious public disorder or crime. There could be no justification for mere gossip around the activities of Peach's ex-girlfriend.
Do you have any recollection of any of the commemorations of Mr. Peach's death leading to any form of disorder?
None whatsoever.
And so can I take it that reporting on Celia Stubbs would have concerned you?
Yes, it would. It would seem an intrusion into her life unnecessarily.
Could we take that document down now, please? 1981, you tell us that you were working in Bethnal Green Police Station.
I was the superintendent and acting chief superintendent in command of Bethnal Green.
And then you tell us that between 1987 and 1988, when you were holding the rank of DAC, you had within your area Notting Hill Police Station. My question arising from those two postings is, can you help us with what key lessons you learned, first of all, about race relations, policing in those areas?
Yes, I will. I was asked to come back to the Met by the then Commissioner, Sir Kenneth Newman, because he was concerned of the serious risk of disorder at Notting Hill Carnival and poor race relations generally in the area. And I spent a great deal of time trying to win the confidence of the organisers of Carnival, and that led to a memorandum of understanding. I remember spending my 40th birthday underneath the motorway in the area, helping to finalise the memorandum of understanding, which would allow police to introduce sanitised corridors for emergency vehicles, to allow a much safer carnival. And so the lesson then and throughout my career is policing can only work at its best with community involvement, support and encouragement. and policing by siege or occupation or imposition is always doomed to failure.
And was there a sense that there were certain groups out there on the far left of the political spectrum who were working against that need to foster good community relations?
Yes, in any capital city, and in particular London, will be the focus for demonstrations, for protests, most of which are totally legitimate and should be supported, encouraged in a free society. But capital cities are vulnerable because of the oxygen of publicity, of riots or disorder, to challenging demonstrations and events. So that is just a fact of life, I think, of capital cities around the free world. And particularly London has a history then and since then of protest, most of which is quite lawful and peaceful, but some of which is violent and not peaceful.
I understand the point you're making there, but my question was more directed at whether there was a sense that there were groups on the left out there who were working against police efforts to build constructive relations with the community.
Yes, I mean, it's, as a generic, it's a very clumsy definition. But there are groups who some might label have extreme views, both on the, for convenience, the far left and also the far right of politics, who will use public disorder both to further their own aims and to cause embarrassment to government and to seek to change the nature of politics in our country.
I want to move now to the period between 1982 and March 1984, when you tell us that you were the staff officer to the then Commissioner Kenneth Newman.
Yes.
Can we have up, please, 748355? Show you first of all this title page. You will see it's a report entitled Political Extremism and the Campaign for Police Accountability within the Metropolitan Police District, and it's a special branch report dated January 1983. If we look at page 2 now, please. I'll give you a moment just to scan your eye over the contents page. When you're ready, tell the projectionist and we will move over to the second page.
Yes, I have a flavour of that first page.
Thank you. If we go to the second, thank you. And if in considering those contents, I could ask you also to get a flavour of what was recorded in the appendices.
Yes, I've noted that.
If we could go now to page 4, please, and to paragraph 1.1 in the introduction. I'll give you a moment to read that.
Yes, I've read that, thank you.
At that point in time, early 1983, what was your thinking about police accountability campaigns?
Then and subsequently, and there's a certain irony in this. I will answer how I felt then, but if I could just fast forward slightly, I didn't apply to be commissioner. I was appointed, and I made it clear to the then Home Secretary and the then head of the Civil Service and head of the Home Office that in taking on that role, I would do so and would campaign for a mayor for London and a proper police committee, because I have always held on to the view, and that view was enhanced as Chief Constable, that policing is far too important to not be enveloped in a process of political accountability, not just for the public interest, but for the police themselves. And so that, reading that now with the benefit of hindsight and knowing my own career trajectory and what I did and influenced and sought to achieve as commissioner, that there is a sort of an 80s paranoia in there around any attempt to sort of look at the activities of the police rather than acknowledging it as legitimate democratic accountability.
The last few lines of this introduction talk about the blatant encouragement of anti-police feelings, and perhaps most significantly of all, the advancement of known political extremists. Was there a feeling in early 1983 that is what the Labour-controlled GLC was doing?
No, I think, I can only talk through the lens of a young chief superintendent at the time, but I think this is symptomatic of a sort of insular, almost inevitable insularity within Special Branch, whose raison d'etre is to monitor and prevent, at the high end, subversion and treason, and at the lower end, events that might lead to serious public disorder. And I think as a senior officer outside of Special Branch, that there was, I always felt there was the nature of the work could give people a jaundiced view and an unsophisticated view of the politics of policing and the need for policing to be enveloped in a legitimate democratic framework. So sitting here, I'm embarrassed by the, and I don't know who the author was. It might have been a quite junior person. It could have been a constable or a sergeant. There is a naivety, a political naivety, which concerns me.
If we could go to the next subparagraph on the same page, 1.2. Just to note that was the purpose of the report and reflecting what Special Branch had done.
Yes.
Once you've absorbed that, can we go to page 45, please? And I'm skipping a very long report to take you to the conclusions.
Yes, I've read this piece. I'm not...
Thank you. page 45, please. Thank you. These are the conclusions. I'll give you a moment to scan those, but on this page, it is subparagraph 1 that I'm most interested in your noting.
Yes, I note that, and I think that is an accusation that I think is overweighted, and I would need it. I'm not aware of evidence to justify that comment. It would be helpful to know who the author of the report was, what rank they were, what credentials they had to be authoring this report.
I can take you to that in a moment. If we go over the page, and then over again. You see, it's written by a detective inspector whose name we've redacted as too junior to warrant public naming, and it's countersigned by Chief Superintendent Greenup, or on behalf of Chief Superintendent.
I mean, in its cultural setting and its political setting, there was a lot going on in national politics that led to the abolition of the GLC, wrongly in my opinion, and London became the only major city in the world, the only major capital in the world, without a democratic framework of a mayor or a committee. It became merely the aggregation of boroughs or faith groups or other organisations. So I think this is a subset, and I think that detective inspector, no disrespect to the rank of inspector, in the context of the seniority of my working life, is a very junior rank, and the language is not the language I would use or encourage, but in the context of national politics, national policing at the time, although it jars significantly with me now, I suspect it would have jarred less so then because of what was happening nationally with politics.
Now, we've gone slightly out of sequence, but whilst we've got this page up, it might be worth you looking at paragraph 6.2 and the final part of the conclusion. And once you've read that, we'll go back one page to look at the rest of the itemised conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, that's a gratuitous comment by a fairly junior ranking officer, I guess, whose every time he was on duty, he or she, their task was this sort of subject matter, and I guess, that depending on their intelligence and sophistication, they would or would not use wording and analysis that either we would approve of or not. And with the benefit of hindsight and the interpretation of democracy and politics and the governance of London now, this jars considerably.
But if I'm understanding your evidence correctly, it is to the effect that at the time, in 1983, the sentiment that political extremists were clearly intent upon causing mischief for the Metropolitan Police Force was one that might have had some traction.
In Special Branch, not necessarily beyond it.
If we could go back one page, please. Again, I'll ask you to scan them, but it's the conclusions at subparagraphs 8 to 11 that I'm most interested in. Would it be possible? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, again, this is, these are the observations of a fairly junior person within Special Branch. The Commissioner at the time, Sir Kenneth Newman, was a sophisticated man who had navigated the politics of Northern Ireland as Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary successfully, and had then been the Commandant of the National Police College at Bramshill, the then police equivalent of Sandhurst and Camberley, and was a sophisticated man who knew the importance of police accountability. And so, I mean, I could relay from my own experience far more sophisticated and nuanced discussions of accountability in London, dismay when the Greater London Authority was disbanded, and a realisation that the Met was going to struggle in that environment.
If I may interrupt you there, for my present purposes, what I am drawing your attention to this document for is you can see that it clearly records a view from within Special Branch, and one can clearly see that Special Branch are collecting intelligence about police monitoring groups, including substantial intelligence about individuals, aren't they?
Yes.
And if we go now, please, to 748422, I'm going to show you the minute sheet associated with this report. And you will see from the title of the file, Political Extremism and the Campaign for Police Accountability within the Metropolitan Police District. We could go to page 2 now, please. And you will see here a minute written by an acting chief superintendent about the provenance, about the author of the report. I'll give you a moment to look at that.
Yes, I've read that, thank you.
So you see that Acting Chief Superintendent Greenup appears in broad terms to be signed up to this report, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
And if we go over the page to subparagraph 5, minute 5, we will see that that ACC, in a minute to DACC-SB through the Commissioner, writes, the report is an excellent piece of work and a copy has been handed to the Commissioner. We spoke, and I understand the Home Office numbered copy has been handed to Mr. Hayden Phillips against his signature. So it would appear this report is regarded as excellent up to ACC level and has gone to the Commissioner.
Yes.
If we go on page 5, please, to minute 11. If this is Commander Wilson's minute. I'll give you a moment to read that.
Yes, I've read that, thank you.
And so, of course, the writer clearly here agrees with the cynical views expressed in the report, doesn't he?
Yes.
And for our purposes, it says, these views were expressed by the Commissioner at his conference with commanders on the 25th of March last. So it appears on the face of the minute that the Commissioner likewise is said to have held the same views.
No, that would be incorrect. I was the Commissioner's staff officer, which is his chief aide. And in my discussions with the Commissioner throughout my time there, I never heard him express in these sort of trenchant views the tone that is set in that minute. I'm not minimising the political context nationally in which all of this would have been happening. The GLC was seen as a push having taken place with, if I can't remember all the names, but that certainly in the Home Office and in government, there was clearly a view that somehow London politically was troublesome, and that eventually led to, say, the virtual disbandment of any political structure London-wide for a number of years. That's the context in which there is talk about this being passed to the Home Office. Hayden Phillips, again, was a very sophisticated senior civil servant whose obituary was in the Times actually about a month ago. And Hayden went on to have a very distinguished, very senior career in the civil service.
We'll be coming to the Home Office's reaction to this document very shortly. But for present purposes,
I mean, to me, I say, and again, the challenge for me is I've known my views throughout. I've known how I lobbied. I made it a condition of my commissionership that I should be able to lobby for and eventually get the issues that I felt were necessary for police accountability in a democratic framework. I don't, looking back, and although we're going back 40 years plus, I didn't have then the sense of urgency or pessimism that these minutes convey.
Can I just stop you there, please, Lord Condon, and ask you this. As the staff officer to the Commissioner at the time, having seen the minutes which show that the Commissioner, that this document went to the Commissioner, can I take it that you would have seen this report at the time?
Not necessarily, no. And there's no, if the Commissioner saw it,
I'm asking first of all whether you would have seen it as his staff
not necessarily,
officer.
no.
Could you explain how that would be?
That it may have been actually taken to the Commissioner. Special branch issues were the one exception to the staff officer being the gatekeeper to the Commissioner's documents. And it was not unusual for the Assistant Commissioner to directly brief the Commissioner and take documents to him. Again, the veil of secrecy, even then, extended to the Commissioner's private staff. So there would have been documents that might have been passed to the Commissioner by hand and accompanied by a verbal elaboration of the report.
Were you vetted at this stage?
Yes.
So there'd be no security reason why
No.
you couldn't see a special
It would have
branch
been
report?
purely a relationship issue that on a document, I would not be surprised if a document like this was taken to the Commissioner personally, either by the head of Special Branch, who at that time would have been a Deputy Assistant Commissioner, which is the rank of Deputy Chief Constable, or indeed the Assistant Commissioner themselves. I have no recollection of that document. That doesn't mean to say I didn't see it. If I did see it, I certainly don't remember it. If I may, Chairman, I think this is symptomatic. My two great passions, or two of my great passions, are history and philosophy. And this is relevant to this, that one of my favourite authors, Julian Barnes, in his Booker Prize-winning novel, The Sense of an Ending, describes history as the certainty at that point where the imperfections of memory meet the inadequacies of documentation. And I think this is a classic example where and I'm not criticising you for this, you are attributing our modern day values, our modern day knowledge, our modern day culture, and extrapolating judgment to documents that were of a different time, in a different setting, in a different politics.
Lord Condon, I can assure...
With the Prime Minister, who at the time, who had decided to emasculate the political control of London.
Lord Condon, I'm attributing nothing of the views set out in this document to you at the moment. I may come to some questions later on when I explore your views with you further. I'm simply trying to establish the facts. And the facts
it would not have been uncommon for either the head of Special Branch or the Assistant Commissioner to sponsor that document by hand to the Commissioner.
And what I'm trying to establish is, as the Commissioner's staff officer, the extent to which you would have been aware, whether you agreed with it or not,
yes,
is a totally separate question, but whether you would have been aware of issues like this, and that Special Branch, whether you thought it was right or wrong, Special Branch was gathering this sort of intelligence.
This does not surprise me at all.
And why does it not surprise you at all?
Because, again, I think we have to set it in the culture of national politics at the time, policing at the time, and society generally at the time. And we were still several years away from the collapse of communism, and there was still a concern within security services, national politics, policing, of, I guess I would use the sort of generic fifth columnists in society who are seeking a different form of government, a different form of control of the country. And that debate was more intense and more to the fore than immediately post the fall of communism and so on. So I think without understanding the political and cultural and historical setting, it's quite hard to apply our mores now to this sort of document.
Understood. If we take that down now, if you could have up, please, 35096. I'm going to take you now to the Home Office's reaction to this, and you mentioned Hayden Phillips, who's the author of this letter, as I understand it, to Sir Brian Cubban. I will give you a moment to look at that, but the proposition I'm going to put to you is it is very clear that the Home Office took a rather dim view of this report.
Yes, I'm pleased and not surprised by Hayden Phillips' response to it.
And if we could go to the second page, you will have seen a reference there to a letter from Special Branch to Mr. Phillips. This is that letter dated the 4th of March. I would like you to scan that, but I'm particularly interested in the last paragraph.
I've read that, thank you.
And so it isn't capitulation, but it's certainly a bit of backtracking.
Sorry, I'm slightly lost. Who is the author of this?
This is from Special Branch.
From who in Special Branch?
If we I'm not sure if it tells us. If we go over the page, if there is over the page.
That's Colin Hewitt.
BAC Colin Hewitt.
Colin Hewitt, yes.
And if we go...
Can I just...
Yes, of course.
Yes, I mean, I as a relatively junior officer, I knew Colin Hewitt, and I had respect for him, and I thought he was a good senior officer, and so that his response to Hayden Phillip, I think, is more measured, as I say, and the original report composed by an inspector was, I think, inappropriate, wildly inappropriate.
If we go back one page and go back to that last paragraph on the page before this. As I was saying, the tone of this letter is backtracking, but not complete capitulation.
Well, that's your interpretation of it.
I'm putting that to you for you to respond, but if I just focus the question before you do, says the Commissioner now has the opportunity to direct other officers to take note of the overt activities of these groups and to determine whether they are monitoring police activity fairly or are just engaged in destructive criticism. So the view seems to be that there's an acceptance that Special Branch shouldn't be doing this, but it is being asserted that other parts of the police, Metropolitan Police Service, might keep an eye on the activities of these police accountability groups. And my question is, would you have been aware of this at the time?
No, I have a very good memory, although I'm in my 80th year. Memory has not been an issue for me. And although as staff officer it's a frenetic role where there are never enough hours in the day or night to fulfill the role, I don't remember being drawn in to this exchange at any stage. And I would like to think that if I had been aware of or drawn in to this exchange, I would have formed a view at the time which would have stayed with me, and I don't have such a view. Colin Hewitt was, a reasonable man, not a zealot. He would have been on, this would not have been a sort of a zealot challenging criticism of police. At the time, that looks like a fairly measured exchange between Colin Hewitt and Hayden Phillips, both men I admired at the time.
If I could
and I think it's saying that the Commissioner has the opportunity to ensure that local senior officers are aware of this debate, that there will be people who are genuinely monitoring police activity, or there may be those whose, to use those words, destructive criticism could lead to serious public disorder. The raison d'etre for any monitoring, assessment, challenging of any of this is not people's politics, which they are in a free society. Thankfully, they're entitled to have. It's whether any of this can get anywhere near causing crime or public disorder or serious injury. There's no suggestion it's getting anywhere near subversion or threats to the state in a more significant way. So I am not surprised that Hayden Phillips quite rightly took the line he took, or the more conciliatory response from Colin Hewitt.
Can I move now to your appointment as Commissioner, and we can take that document down now. You told Operation Hearn that your office had a staff officer, a private secretary and an assistant.
More than that. My private office had about 7 administrative staff. I had a staff officer and sometimes an assistant staff officer, and I had a protection team because for most of my commissionership I was a legitimate, not a legitimate, but I was a target for Irish terrorism.
Now, you make the point very clearly in your witness statement that this is a very big job with an enormous number of people under your command, an enormous number of important issues on the go at any one time. Can I take it, the impression I've got from your witness statement, that some issues you would see in writing, other issues you would be briefed upon orally by your staff who had read the material for you?
Yes. In any large organisation, whether it's private or public sector, a lot of action is taken in the name of the boss. So people would say things like, the commissioner would like, or the commissioner would be interested in, or what they mean is they would like things done on behalf of the commissioner. In the same way, if even in this environment, if within this building someone says the chairman would like, or the chairman is interested in, that has a weighting on action. So yes, there is a private staff that are both gatekeepers to meetings and documentation. And even in my time, the Met was still a paper-driven organisation. And they are also part of the commissioning structure so that they can plan the commissioner's life and events and knowledge as productively as possible.
Understanding the gatekeeping function of your staff, it would be right, would it, though, that significant matters should always have been brought to your attention one way or the other?
Yes, and normally, certainly in my commissionership, the most documents that came across my desk would have been sponsored and minuted by one of my most senior team. Otherwise, I had a habit of, if a document came on my desk, it didn't leave it without me acknowledging me having seen it. So I would either put noted and sign it, or please discuss, or for action, or whatever, so that I and all of my staff could see then and now whether I had seen a document and responded to it.
A very high-level question now. During your tenure as Commissioner, what did you do to address misogyny and sexual misconduct?
I made it absolutely clear from the moment I was told I was going to be Commissioner that I would be seeking to bring in a reform programme. It took me nearly 5 years to persuade Parliament, successive Home Secretaries, to change the law and police regulations to make it easier for me to deal with bad police officers. I inherited a discipline structure which meant that if a police officer was acquitted of criminal charges, the same evidence could not be used in discipline. So juries then were reluctant to convict police officers, and police officers who it was feared had committed very serious criminal acts returned to policing, and they and their colleagues had to work with them. Similarly, there was no right to draw inferences from a police officer's silence in disciplinary proceedings. The burden of proof was the criminal burden. There was no fast-track system for gross misconduct. Against the morale of the force and the wishes of the Police Federation and the Superintendents Association, I went to Parliament and gave evidence and said, I fear I may have as many as 200 really bad officers in the Met who are doing terrible things, who are committing crimes, maybe up to and including murder. And I need your help to be able to deal with these bad officers. At the time that drew national headlines, it was realised I had a campaign to change the structure of dealing with bad behaviour, from whether it's racism through to the most serious crime. And I'm pleased to say that in early 1998, I gave that very controversial evidence earlier, and had been briefing media for years of the need for that. Those changes were implemented. I also implemented a very controversial career management policy which said that no one could stay at a police station or in a specialist unit for more than 10 years, because I feared that one of the challenges with misogyny, racism, corruption is that little units can develop unhealthy cultures, and unless you guarantee a turnover of management, you're less likely to intervene. I published a number of strategic documents which every senior officer had to sign up to, which said we've got to have the right people doing the right things in the right way. Clearly, SDS, for a long periods of time, was the wrong people doing the wrong things in the wrong way. So I spent a huge amount of time on transforming the ability of myself and subsequent commissioners to deal with bad behaviour. And I'm very proud of that. I also introduced training courses. In 1998, I introduced the strongest anti-corruption and bad behaviour programme the Met has had. I introduced integrity testing of police officers' behaviour, where randomly at police stations, people within the complaints process would test the behaviour of police officers who didn't know they were being tested. So yes, clearly this inquiry is looking into horrendous things that went wrong. But I am incredibly proud of issues that were taking place throughout my commissionership to deal with bad behaviour, right up to and including the most serious criminal activities by police officers. And it shames me to say it, but I know that I had police officers who were not only racist and misogynist, they were committing very serious crimes.
So would this be an appropriate moment to take our first 10-minute break?
Certainly. We'll break for 10 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
Lord Condon, Stephen Lawrence was murdered in April 1993.
Yes.
By the 4th of May, his family were expressing frustrations with police efforts to catch his killers at a press conference. Would you have been aware of that press conference?
Yes, I would, but again, to put it in context, the same weekend of Stephen's tragic murder, the Bishopsgate bomb went off in London. One person was killed, dozens were injured, and about £1 billion worth of damage was done, and we feared follow-up attacks of equal size and proportion. And so around about that time, I think there was a 2-day difference between Stephen's tragic murder and the bomb went off on the 24th. And so my immediate focus over those next couple of weeks were around trying to prevent further bombs in London. But yes, I mean, as Commissioner, at that point, there were normally about 150 to 200 murders a year in London. Many of the victims were black and ethnic minority Londoners. And so in the early stages of the inquiry, I would not have been personally drawn in or been aware, but probably by the stage you're mentioning, I'm sure it would have been brought to my notice.
On the 6th of May, Stephen's family met Nelson Mandela. Did
Yes.
you know that was going to happen?
No, I don't think I did. Subsequently, Nelson Mandela did a state visit to London, and I met him and was invited back to South Africa to review South African police. But I don't remember in advance, and at the time and subsequently, I mean, it was suggested that the Metropolitan Police either did more or did less at the behest of Nelson Mandela. That was certainly not the case as far as I was concerned.
Arrests of suspects started the next day. Are you able to assist whether there was a connection between the meeting with Nelson Mandela and the decision to arrest?
As far as I am aware, and I would have been aware, I'm not aware of any connection whatsoever other than coincidence.
And was, by this stage, the issue big enough to be on your radar as Commissioner?
Not as a significant issue, but as one of the issues that I would have been aware of, yes.
And were being kept informed about?
Not kept informed, no, that would be too strong. In the range of issues that would have been on my agenda at the time, the biggest one still would have been preventing massive bombs in London, and that would have been the main focus of my days and my nights.
Can I put it
justifiably so, because further explosions did take place. But I would have, if you said 2-3 weeks after the horrific murder of Stephen Lawrence, was I aware of his name? Was I aware of the tragedy? Yes, of course. But it was not at that stage a significant issue more than any of the other murders that were being investigated simultaneously at the time.
Well, is that right in the sense that there was a justice campaign which had achieved a degree of profile?
Certainly very quickly. And when I came into the Met, there was a history of tragic deaths and murders of black and ethnic minority Londoners, which had quite properly generated anger and concern. And so Stephen's death and subsequent protests I would have been aware of.
Were you asking for information relating to Stephen's murder?
I can remember my staff officer at the time, a man called Peter Clark, who went on to senior rank and became Chief Inspector of Prisons and did other roles for the government. I can remember Peter asking for information on my behalf and briefing me once I realised, and he realised on my behalf, that this was a significant case.
What sort of information was he asking for on your behalf?
I think probably it would have been an update on, we're probably talking a number of weeks into the investigation, probably what was the state of the investigation, were suspects arrested, likely to be arrested, and so on. So it would have been an update on the investigation.
Was there any appetite to understand the campaign better?
Elaborate.
Did you want to know who was supporting the Lawrence's campaign?
No.
Who was surrounding the Lawrence family?
Not particularly, no.
Whether left-wing groups were trying to exploit the tragedy to their own ends?
I don't remember actively seeking that information. I do remember being briefed probably by my staff officer, that Stephen's death was clearly going to be in a category where it quite properly attracted much interest and concern and activity. Yes. But if the implication is, was I seeking information on Stephen's family or who was supporting? No.
Well, what I would like to ask is, was your staff officer seeking information about whether extremists were trying to capitalise on the tragedy?
Only if it could have led to two things. Only if it could have led to public disorder or exploitation of grieving parents.
And were those things that you discussed with your staff officer?
I don't think I did in the terms that I've just expressed them to you. I would have received general updates at some point. I mean, clearly, I would have been aware of both the publicity and the very legitimate concerns raised by the family and others. So this would not have been something which I either ignored or was unaware of or sensitive to.
Can you recall whether your staff officer was relaying to you anything about the involvement of left-wing extremists?
Certainly I can remember at the time fears that Stephen's death would attract involvement of groups that could lead to protest and disorder. I can certainly remember that quite clearly.
And can you recall whether it was a one-way traffic of you being told, or whether you were asking for any further information about that?
I can say categorically that I have no memory whatsoever of seeking information of who was involved in any form of associated protests linked to Stephen's death. I did not actively, I have no memory. If I had a memory, I would tell you openly and honestly, but I have no memory of specifically asking for that information. I do have memory of not passively, but of it coming into me as information, primarily from Peter Clark, my staff officer, who would have rung the inquiry team, I have no doubt, at some stage, because of the growing importance of the case.
I was going to come to that. You would have expected your staff officer to make inquiries on your behalf.
Yes, most certainly.
Can you recall him telling you he'd spoken to the inquiry team?
Not specifically, but I would be disappointed if he hadn't telephoned himself and tried to get an update from the murder inquiry team at some stage, so he could, with authority, brief me on where they had reached or not reached in their inquiry.
Can you recall what you were told about the activities of left-wing extremists arising from Stephen's murder?
No, I can't. Not that I don't want to, but I have no vivid memories. I can remember of it feeling in the context of other tragic deaths of black or ethnic minority Londoners that had not been investigated to completion, that with arrests and convictions and so on. So in my mind, I was aware that quite properly, in addition to the awful grief and tragedy affecting an individual family, it was attracting attention from groups who had played a role in other unsuccessful murder investigations. And I don't say that in a pejorative sense, I just say it in a very factual way. It did not worry me in a way that I felt anything other than an awareness of that was the reality of policing London. It was the reality of quite proper concern and grief and activation around the death of more than one young black or ethnic minority Londoner over a number of years.
Can you recall whether your staff officer told you that whether or not he'd consulted Special Branch?
I'm not aware of him ever linking Special Branch to the briefing. I think it was not rocket science. It was pretty obvious from protests and demonstration and placard and media statements and people speaking on behalf of the family. I mean, it didn't need subterfuge or anything beyond just calculated appraisal of what was happening in the real world. Most of which was very public knowledge.
Would you have expected your staff officer to contact Special Branch, for example, about some of the protest that was going on?
No, not unless... Well, later in the year, there were a number of very violent protests, not all linked to the tragedy of Stephen's death, but the Met I came back to was a Met that was not unfamiliar with protests linked to the deaths of young Londoners.
Yeah. We'll come to the demonstration in October at Welling in due course.
And there are others before
but
that.
But there were disturbances in the first half of the year as well, weren't
Yes,
there?
there were.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really what I'm driving at is, would you have expected your staff officer to have contacted Special Branch about those?
No, because that, if you like, that was not... He may have done, but the primary responsibility for policing public order and demonstrations and anticipating them and planning a police response was not my staff officer. I had a whole branch devoted to public order that would be doing that. So it was not his specific role. Knowing Peter Clark, who went on to very senior roles within and without policing, he no doubt would have followed his inclination to get information. But I wouldn't have... I'm not saying he didn't, and if he did, I'm not saying that was inappropriate, but I'm not aware of it.
I mean, what I'm understanding your evidence to be is you think it might have been more likely that he would have contacted the public order people.
Yes, if he wanted to know, if Peter wanted to know what was the prospect of upcoming serious disorder or demonstrations. I mean, as Commissioner, I was not in command. To use police language, there is a gold commander for serious public events and disorder. The Commissioner is never gold commander.
Are you being briefed about the public order issues which might be in some way or another connected to the strength of feeling following Stephen's murder?
Yes.
Were you at this time having regular meetings with the Home Secretary?
Yes. I mean, part of the challenge of accountability for the police was, unlike every other police force that had a full-time police committee, a chairman, a committee made up of local politicians, magistrates and others, the biggest police force in the country with the most intense problems, its police authority was a part-time role for the Home Secretary of the day, perhaps 1 hour a month.
When you were attending those regular meetings
Well, not regular, they were, in my terms, they were anything but regular.
We're going to come to some later on, which appear to have been monthly. So am I to understand your evidence that in 1993 your meetings with the Home Secretary were episodic?
Yes.
Would Stephen's murder have featured, or anything arising from it, have featured in your discussions with the then Home Secretary?
It's hard to remember. I'm not being opaque about that. I just don't have... my Home Secretary for the first few months was Ken Clark, and then it was Michael Howard. So in the first few months, and including Stephen's death, it would have been Ken Clark. And it would not have been his style to want to be briefed on operational matters like that.
And was the same from the position for Michael Howard, or was he a man of different temperament?
He had more of an appetite for forensic. He was a detail man. He liked detail. He liked to be briefed. And I suspect it would have been more likely that Michael Howard would have an appetite for operational briefings than Ken Clark.
And can you recall whether the subject was raised when you met Michael Howard?
I can't recall, but it would have been strange if I hadn't raised it, as the intensity of the protests grew during the year. It would have been probably strange if it hadn't occurred.
And you've referred in that answer to protest. So was it the public order aspect that was a concern?
Yes. I mean, that can be the only legitimate concern was, and let's say having at more junior ranks right up to quite senior ranks been involved in or in charge of serious public order events. It's an onerous responsibility because very quickly people can get, both police and public, can get very seriously injured in those events.
Would part of those conversations have involved discussing the sorts of groups that might be getting themselves involved in these protests?
It may well have done.
And their agendas?
It may well have done.
Can you recall any specifics?
No, I can't.
Can we move now to a completely different topic? Could we have up 36884? This is a letter which you wrote to the then Lord Chancellor, Lord Mackay of Clashfern, on the 2nd of August 1993. The most important paragraphs are on this page, the first paragraph, and over the page when we get to it, to the penultimate paragraph on the second page. I'll give you a moment to read it, but could you focus, as I've said, on the first paragraph on that first page, and when you get to it, the penultimate paragraph on the second page?
Yeah, I've no recollection of that whatsoever, but it clearly was a document that had been prepared for me, and clearly it must have been part of a national strategy, because there's reference to the Chief Constable of Thames Valley expressing his concern, and the Association of Chief Police Officers, which was the collective body for chief constables and policy. So I suspect that had been, certainly I did not commission that. Clearly I signed it and would have been aware of it and endorsed it and sent it on its way. But that clearly must have been generated from within not just the Met, but was clearly part of a national concern around that issue.
Yep. If we go to the next page and to the penultimate paragraph there, that seems to illustrate the scale of the problem.
Yeah, it's not my language. It's clearly been drafted for me, and I don't say it in any way from dissociating myself from it or acknowledging it's mine, but clearly that had got to me as part of a major concern nationally and within other police forces, and I suspect that was part of a coordinated response by the police service to raise that issue. I say, sitting here now, I have no strong memories around the mischief, the alleged mischief that we were seeking to remedy. Although my mind is analysing as we're talking what that was about. But yes, I mean, if your subtext is this illustrative of me knowing all sorts of things about SDS and their activities at that point, you're wrong.
No, I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting, as far as I'm going, is you are aware at this stage that there is a tension between the police and the courts about disclosure issues relating to sensitive sources, such that you have been asked to and have written a letter to the Lord Chancellor about it.
Yes, and clearly it must have been part of a coordinated set of activities, probably that had been discussed within the Association of Chief Police Officers. And clearly an action plan probably arose out of that. And clearly I was at the time content to be part of raising that concern with the Lord Chancellor.
If you could take that down now, please. I'm following chronologically and moving on next to October 1993 and the Welling riot.
Yes.
Of the 16th of October. If you could have up, please, 749355. This is a handwritten memorandum which appears to be from DAC Howley. If we could have the main text expanded, please. So we can take it that you had an awareness that some sort of undercover police officers had provided intelligence ahead of the Welling demonstration such that you wish to thank them.
It's more complex and nuanced than that.
I've read your statement and what you say in your witness statement.
But your partial analysis so far is right.
Yeah. Can I ask you, first of all, you'd made a Section 12 order, an order under Section 12 of the Public Order Act to reroute that demonstration.
Yes, I did.
At the very highest level, was that because you considered it too risky to permit them to march past the BMP's bookshop?
I will choose my words carefully because I realise there's only limited information I can say in open inquiry. But the sequence of events was the then Assistant Commissioner Specialist Operations, William Taylor, who went on to be Commissioner of the City of London and Chief Inspector of Constabulary of Scotland. In the build-up to the demonstrations, William Taylor told me that we had very reliable intelligence that would cause him and me to seriously anticipate the most violent of protests had the march been allowed to take its original planned route past a British National Party bookshop and de facto headquarters. And I was sufficiently convinced that, it may have been the only occasion when I used that piece of legislation, I felt that I had to reroute the march, prophetically as it turned out, because It was very, very violent. 60 people plus were hospitalised. 20 police officers were hospitalised. 40 members of the public, many of them very seriously injured. Firebombs were recovered, weaponry, and I fear that had that march gone ahead as planned, it could have led to deaths and very serious injuries. After the weekend of the march, in Parliament, in the House of Lords, there was a very short debate about the...
Lord Condon, could I stop you? Because we've read your statement and we've got a lot to get through today.
Okay, so the thanking the officers was, in that debate, the House of Lords asked for me to pass on thanks to officers. I saw Bill Taylor and said, if it's possible, can I thank the undercover officers? And I was told it would be too dangerous for me to do so, because either bringing them to a police building or me visiting them would risk exposing their activities. And so I then requested that Parliament's gratitude and mine be passed to the officers.
Before the demonstration, did you see any risk assessment?
It's hard to remember. I believe most of my concern was in response to very detailed verbal briefings by Assistant Commissioner Taylor.
Can you recall whether or not you were shown any specific intelligence reports?
I can't recall, no.
Can you recall whether you were told that there was a risk that the bookshop might be physically attacked?
Yes.
Were you told that it was believed there was a plan to commit arson?
Yes.
Were you told anything about where that intelligence had come from?
Yes.
And was it to the effect it had come from undercover police officers?
Yes.
At that stage, did you understand those police officers to have been involved in long-term undercover operations?
It's hard to say from this standpoint now. Not categorically, but the nature of the intelligence was so stridently important that common sense would have suggested it was long term.
We understand from the record of your interview with Mr. Ellison, King's Counsel, that you told Mr. Ellison that you'd briefed the Home Secretary in advance that there was good intelligence.
Yes, I did, and that concerned me. That was mentioned by Lord Ferrers, who was a Home Office Minister, in the House of Lords debate. And so I was worried that that might lead to speculation.
And had the Home Secretary been told that the intelligence had come from an undercover police officer?
I cannot say categorically, but I believe I would have got as close, if not being absolutely frank with the Home Secretary as to the origin of the information. Like me, he would have had to be convinced that there was a requirement for me to redirect the march.
Lord Condon, I hate hypothetical questions, but I'm going to have to ask you one now. If you could listen very carefully to this, but when answering, feel free to put whatever nuance you wish.
Of course.
Assume the intelligence about there being a specific plan to firebomb or physically attack the building is held to be false or exaggerated. But assume that intelligence that large numbers of people who strongly wanted the bookshop to be shut down in the wake of those numerous murders in southeast London, which either were or appeared to be racist, but demonstrators mostly peaceful, many from disciplined organisations, but including some volatile characters. If that had been the picture presented to you, would you have made the Section 12 order?
No. On the day, there were two simultaneous marches. The sort of march you'd have described did take place in central London and was very peaceful and dignified and was to protest exactly along the lines as you described. But that was not the case for the one in Welling that led to 60 people being hospitalised and dozens, if not hundreds more, injured.
And if it was just the intelligence about the plan to firebomb or physically attack the building that is held to be false or exaggerated, would you have still made the Section 12 order?
And that's a very bizarre question.
It is difficult, I understand.
Well, not difficult, it's just bizarre. Why would I make an order if I knew something was false?
No. What I'm putting to you is if you hadn't been told that. So if you're not told you're not told there's a plan to firebomb,
Yep.
You're not told there's a plan to physically attack the building,
Yep.
but you do know there's going to be a very large demonstration in Welling in circumstances where feelings will be high.
Largeness, 100,000, 250,000, would not precipitate thoughts of changing a march. I think I only used that power once during I could be wrong, but I think that was the only occasion I used that power. And without seeming arrogant, I think it was prophetic and necessary and probably may even have saved lives.
What I'm driving at is how important a factor in your decision-making was intelligence that there was a plan to firebomb or physically attack the building.
It was part of it, but the violence was not linked as was shown on the day. The bookshop was not firebombed. The protest was incredibly violent, and more through luck than judgment, people were not killed. But over 60 were hospitalised, many of whom had life-changing injuries.
We're going to come to an occasion when you did visit the SDS in 1995.
Yes.
What I would like to know at this stage is, can you recall whether you visited them any earlier than that?
No, I've been made aware of people saying I visited around after this event, or and talk of a bottle of whiskey being taken, and unless I'm having an incredibly senior moment, that just did not happen. And I think what must have been confused is whether Bill Taylor or another very, very senior officer, again, as part of my passing on thanks, I'm not, I enjoy a glass of wine, but it's never been my style to reward officers or say to officers, take drink to officers as part of a thank you. So the documentation that I've been made aware of, say, unless I am having an incredible lapse of memory or a senior moment, in my own mind, I am absolutely convinced that the only time I visited anything remotely like an SDS office was to provide a high commendation for matters which I am not at liberty to go into detail for the reasons the inquiry will be aware of. But no, I say this has totally perplexed me. I mean, if I'd visited, I would say so. I mean, it's not. I'm not being devious or.
Understood, Lord Condon. Can I take you to another topic now? Could we have up, please, 746107? Now, this is a letter that was written to you in March 1994 by a Detective Sergeant Chitty. Now, Detective Sergeant Chitty at that time was facing disciplinary proceedings for financial irregularities whilst he was serving as a protection.
If it will help with the timing, I have no recollection of that whatsoever, and which makes me think that unless you're going to show me something which shows that I did see it and acknowledged it, and that the sort of content and the sort of memory I have, I would be amazed if I couldn't remember it.
Yeah.
And
Lord Condon, my questions are going to be a bit more subtle than that. So, Detective Sergeant Chitty is facing disciplinary proceedings arising from financial irregularities as a protection officer. He had previously served as an undercover police officer and was pleading that the impact of that service on him had affected him severely and should be taken into account. It's quite a long letter. I'm going to take you to page 5, please. If you look just at the, I'm just ask you at this stage to note the penultimate paragraph on page 5.
yes,
So on the face of it, in this part of the letter, Detective Sergeant Chitty is writing to the effect that as an undercover police officer, he'd appeared as a defendant in court.
right.
If, and I'm not suggesting you did, if you had read this letter...
I can say categorically I didn't.
Yeah.
Because the more information that you're revealing piecemeal to me for obvious tactical reasons, still makes me believe that I didn't see this.
I can tell you, Lord Condon, it's more for the business of getting through your evidence in time. I want to know, if you had read it, would that have been something of concern to you that an undercover police officer had been appearing in court as a defendant?
Yes.
Now, I understand you're a very busy man, you've got gatekeepers. Am I to understand from your evidence so far that this is precisely the sort of document that would be screened out of being put in front of you?
For a number of reasons, not the least of which that the Commissioner at the time was in a unique position that for disciplinary purposes, I was the appellate authority. So I didn't try disciplinary cases and adjudicate. I was the appellate authority. And so all matters of serious discipline I was kept immune from in case there was an appellate process. And so it was not just gatekeeping either around content or timescales. It would have been a due process and fairness issue. I was the appellate authority.
Yeah.
And so if this was live discipline, there's no way my staff would have allowed that to come through to me.
Would you have expected your staff to read it?
Yeah, any document coming into the Commissioner's office would be read and processed. And hopefully you have, or there would have been a file which shows what happened to this document and how it was processed and who it went to.
Would you have expected your staff officer to have had the same reaction that you would have had reading this paragraph?
It depends on the... Sorry, can you just remind me of the timing again? What?
This is March 1994.
Yeah, that was probably still Peter Clark, who... No, I'm not sure that even someone as bright as Peter at superintendent level would have realised the significance of that.
So on the face of it, it is a, albeit rather deeply buried clue, it is a clue to one of the things that was going wrong on the SDS.
With the amazing, wonderful benefit of hindsight, of the hundreds of thousands of documents that would have passed through the Met during my time as commissionership, yes, that sentence, had I seen it, would have triggered thoughts and questions and follow-ups.
And can I take...
I'm not surprised that a staff officer run ragged in the rank of superintendent didn't realise the significance, but I would hope and assume that it would have been processed and given, it would have been put back in the process either in relation to the discipline or personnel or whatever. It would, again, if it had reached my office, then it would have left that office with some adjudication as to what should happen next. Not by me, but my staff. I had excellent staff, and documentation that came in for either decision or information had an action attached to it. So something must have happened to this letter to process it.
Can we take that down now, please? And can we have 746093? This is a later document about the same case. Now, this again is DAC Howley. Now, what this minute does is record that Detective Sergeant Chitty was going to plead guilty to the charges. But the background to it is that there'd been an internal debate about what to do with Detective Sergeant Chitty. It had been decided to discipline him, and he was disciplined. If we go to the if you look at the bottom of this, it says...
I've read it all.
Yeah, right, you see there's a reference there to the media. If we go to the next page, please. Right, there is a draft letter to the media. Maybe the break will save me, sir, and we'll come back to it immediately after the break.
Okay. We'll break for 10 minutes.
Could we have up, please, 746095, please? This is the document I was just about to refer to before the break. Now, what has happened in the Chitty case is Chitty's being disciplined, said he's going to plead guilty, so there is no need to deal with the media. But a draft letter to editors had been prepared, and essentially it was of the kind that informs the press that they may be told something that they really shouldn't publish in the public interest. I'll give you a moment just to look at that.
I have no knowledge of that letter and I've never seen it or anything like it.
Did anybody say anything to you, brief you orally, to the effect that there was a possibility that a former undercover police officer might be indiscreet with the press?
No. I have no recollection whatsoever around that letter or any discussion that led to its generation.
Can we take that document down now? I want to move to 1995 and the occasion when you visit the SDS safe house to present a commendation to an officer who is wholly anonymous. A yes/no answer to this, please. Did you read the recommendation for commendation?
I cannot remember, but I would assume I did.
And would you have been briefed before the visit?
Yes.
And would you have been briefed sufficiently to understand in broad outline what the SDS was and what it was doing?
Yes.
So would you have understood by that stage that it was a special branch undercover unit involved in long-term intelligence gathering operations?
Yes.
I don't want to ask you anything about the officer to whom the commendation was awarded, but when you visited the safe house, is it right that you were able to speak to some undercover police officers?
Very briefly, the purpose of the visit, one of the things the Commissioner can do is award high commendations very rarely to police officers for the most gallant or outstanding professional work. And so the purpose of this visit was to award such a high commendation. I was briefed by Deputy Assistant Commissioner John Howley, who was head of Special Branch at the time, that there would be a number of other SDS officers there, and I was invited not to discuss with them their current deployments or anything beyond the realm of the high commendation. Not, I think, in any way to censor me from him or to mask me from information, but simply because it was felt that would have been inappropriate and would have led to it seeming more like an inspection visit than a celebration of outstanding courage and bravery. And I acceded to that request, and so it was a brief visit to a location in central London which involved changing cars and drivers and various other subterfuges. And it was a brief celebration of that officer and the commendation, and in passing thanking other officers in a general way for their work and their courage.
Can you recall speaking to an officer called Detective Sergeant Andy Coles?
No.
Can you recall speaking to an undercover police officer who was deployed in the animal rights field?
No.
Can you recall speaking to an undercover police officer who was deployed into the Socialist Workers' Party?
No. Again, I'm not saying that in any way to disassociate from their deployments or what they were doing. My memory of that event was my mindset on the day was about saying the things to emphasize the reason for the high commendation and making the individual officer feel valued for the bravery that had led to that. And I remember relatively brief discussions with other officers who were there, not in any detail and not about their specific deployments.
Could we have up, please, 527228? This is a gist of a file of documents relating to the visit. If we have page 3, please. And at the bottom of the... That's right, thank you. You will see page 6 is a gist of the, or as part of it's quoted, a quote of the briefing note on the SDS from the mid-90s relating to this visit. I'll give you a moment just to refresh your memory.
Yes, I've read that, thank you.
Now, I'm interested in at the bottom of the page, it says, at present, field officers provide intelligence in the following areas: Socialist Workers' Party, Anti-Nazi League, Militant Labour, Youth Against Racism in Europe. This coverage is essential in obtaining timely intelligence about the intentions of activists involved in potentially violence demonstrations concerning a range of issues, including anti-fascists and anti-police protests. Now, I appreciate that the purpose of your visit was to commend an officer, but when you were briefed to this effect, did you consider whether it was appropriate for the Metropolitan Police Service to be deploying an undercover officer long-term into the Socialist Workers' Party or Militant Labour to obtain intelligence only about potentially violent demonstrations?
I don't remember. The briefing, I think, was oral rather than this document. But even if I had read this document, there is nothing in that document, I will be very honest, that would set off alarm bells for me at the time. I had been in charge of, at more junior rank, the policing of demonstrations involving, I suspect, some of those organisations at times. And I had seen, since my time as commissioner, very, very violent demonstrations, more than one, which had led to very serious life-changing injuries for members of the public and police officers. So I have to be honest and say that I probably would not and was not animated beyond taking it at face value for what it says.
Can you recall whether you asked any questions about the detail of the targeting of the unit?
No, because the whole purpose, focus, and rationale for the visit was not an inspection either planned or surprise. It was my style to quite often drop in unannounced at police stations, at units, for the purposes of inspection and knowledge and checking and digging into what they were doing and speaking to individual officers and driving down about their supervision, their posting, their welfare and so on. This was not such an occasion. My mindset would have been around celebrating the incredible bravery on a matter which I'm not at liberty to discuss, but which the inquiry is aware of.
So can I take it that on this occasion you did not dig down into
No, I
what the
didn't,
SDF
because that was not the purpose of the visit.
Can we take that document down now, please? Can we go to 749313, please? We're moving now to September 1996.
96.
Now, this is a letter from the Security Service to its two chief constables, and it's about the study of subversion. And it is to the effect that the Security Service's interest in subversion is waning to the level of a watching view. Is this a document that is likely to have crossed your desk?
No.
Are you likely to have understood that the Security Service's interest in subversion following the end of the Cold War was waning?
Oh, yes, most definitely. The reason I say it won't have come to me, because in the Met context, the Chief Constable concerned would have been the Assistant Commissioner Specialist Operations, who was a senior Chief Constable rank, more senior than many county police chiefs running provincial police forces. And so that's who would have received it in the Met. I was acutely aware of the short-term peace dividend from the fall of communism and the euphoria that greeted it. I have no doubt David Vaness, who would have been the Assistant Commissioner Specialist Ops and the recipient of the letter on my behalf, would have discussed it with me. And I think I've said in my statement that the police service was less sanguine about this than the security service, because the security service were not charged with policing the streets of London or serious demonstrations or associated public order issues. So clearly aware of the geopolitics involved, of what was happening internationally, nationally, and within London. But again, if your subtext is, should this have triggered, do less in special branch in relation to subversion. Subversion starts at the innocent end with protest, and at the serious end finishes in treason. And the Met could not be sanguine about that spectrum of activity totally. And so we needed to maintain watching brief and beyond to ensure that subversion did not tip over into crime and serious public disorder. The Latin root for subversion literally means turning from beneath. And it was the police task to monitor the activities that could and did lead to serious disorder on the streets of London.
What was your understanding of the definition of subversion?
At the time, I would have had probably a technical awareness of subversion, but it's, in essence, threats to the security and the safety of the state and its form of government, democracy itself.
If we could take that document down now, please. I want to move to the end of 1996.
Yes.
There comes a time when an undercover police officer from the SDS, who we're calling HN1, is recommended for a commissioner's commendation, and that is a recommendation which you endorse. I'll show you, we'll bring up the recommendation. It's 745905. If we go to the next page, please. I'll give you a moment to read that.
Yes, I've read that, thank you.
On the face of it, a glowing write-up about very brave policing.
Yes.
If you look at the chronology, first of all, on the first line, between January 1992 and December 1996, so that is a clear illustration, isn't it, of the length of deployment that some SDS officers were involved in.
Yes.
And if you see the end date, December 1996.
Yes.
If we go to the bottom paragraph, it says intelligence supplied by DSHN1 in May 1995 provided the basis for an anti-terrorist branch operation which culminated in the arrest and conviction of a leading London-based ALF activist. When you think back to that exchange of correspondence we looked at earlier from 1993, when you wrote to the then Lord Chancellor about disclosure issues with covert sources, what's striking about these dates is you can see that the undercover officer stays in situ even after the trap is sprung, because he's a long-term intelligence gatherer. So his identity, his presence has not been disclosed at the trial. I appreciate this was put in front of you as a glowing report of bravery by an undercover police officer, but did it occur to you when reading this that the officer had continued to deploy after the trap had been sprung?
I don't wish to be rude, Mr. Barr, but that's that in the context of this report, my role as Commissioner, what I knew at the time, that is such a retrospective challenge as to be almost beyond belief.
I'll take that.
No, it didn't.
I'll take that as a no.
It didn't, and I'm not surprised that it didn't.
But one of the difficulties with long-term intelligence gathering operations, which leaves officers in situ after their intelligence has been used to initiate criminal process, is you can get miscarriages of justice arising from that, can't you?
Being serious, I accept that totally.
Now,
But that, I must confess, this did not trigger those thoughts.
I am not suggesting that this is anything other than the most fiendishly hidden clue.
Yes.
But the question I had to put to you
It
is...
there, I acknowledge that. It didn't trigger those thoughts, but I can see theoretically in an inquiry that has had 12 years to look at these documents, that's unfair, you may not have had 12 years, but in the context of the real world of operational policing, that this did not trigger those thoughts for me on that occasion.
The next point I want to put to you about this commendation is totally buried. You had no knowledge of it at all. I just want to put what we now know to you. What we now know is HN1 was conducting a sexual relationship with a woman called Denise Fuller. When did you first know that HN1 conducted a sexual relationship with Denise Fuller?
Post-2014, I assume, when the publicity broke around these issues. From my memory, that would have been the first. These sexual relationships, again, unless I'm having a senior moment or a total failure of memory, I had no knowledge or expectation that undercover officers were engaging in sexual relationships.
I'm not suggesting you knew, because this relationship was hidden even from us at the start of the inquiry.
So
we now know about it.
I'm not sure I've ever been, because although this is under Chairman's life, I do other things with my life.
Yeah, no.
And so I've not followed every nuance and day of the inquiry.
That's fine, Lord Condon. What I would like to know, though, is now that I've told you that this undercover officer who received a commendation from you was in fact sexually deceiving, as it happens, a very vulnerable woman, yes. I'll compound the question. What is your reaction, and what difference would it have made to your decision to commend him if you had known?
I would have been appalled, and he wouldn't have been commended.
And I want to use this example to explore a particular issue with you. When you were the commissioner and you were awarding commendations, if information came to light to suggest that the person concerned, the recipient, should not have been awarded the commendation, what happened?
Again, that's such a bizarre question. I mean, no one would be recommended for a commendation in those circumstances.
If you find out afterwards, what happens?
Well, I never did find out afterwards.
If you've got no practical experience, the reason I'm asking is this. We've heard evidence from a number of undercover officers who received various forms of commendation. Some of them commissioners' commendations, some of them lesser commendations. And I'm driving at whether or not they should retain those commendations now it is known of their misconduct.
No, they shouldn't. If retrospect... this may be... If the chairman would indulge me, I'm not digressing, but I think an important point needs to be made, that I am aware of, now aware of appalling behaviour by individual officers. But equally, I think the greater fault lies with the Metropolitan Police as a whole. Over decades, that these officers were told daily as their job to lie, cheat and deceive as a way of life and what they are asked to do. The Metropolitan Police should have realised, we should have realised, that without limits, without ethical guidance, that this work in those circumstances can be corrupting, and even someone with a strong moral compass will give in to baser instincts and so on. So I want to make the point that I'm not going to sit here and give evidence holier than thou. These are just rogue officers who've done some bad things. The greater fault is the systemic fault by the Met. So yes, by all means, if these officers have acted so badly and appallingly that they're not worthy of commendation, then if there is a process for removing that recognition, then take that process forward. But I'm just slightly wary of wanting to be a commissioner who is sort of washing his hands of all this wrongdoing. That would be unfair to the officers and to their families. The responsibility for much of what's happened should be laid at the door of the Metropolitan Police over the decades, as well as the individual officers.
Can we take that document down now, please? Could we have up 746143? We're moving now to early 1997. And this is a minute. I'll give you a moment to read it. If we go over the page. And if you can look at the top minute is to you, and the bottom minute shows that you have seen and noted.
And that illustrates that would have been my style, that if I saw a document, I would acknowledge it.
And so you are being told of two SDS triumphs, aren't you? One involving Christmas turkeys and an ALF plot to poison them, and another about work that has been done to thwart a protest on the Dartford Bridge.
Yes.
Is there any particular reason why the actions of a very small unit like this are going all the way to the top of the chain of command?
Can we go back to the previous page?
Of course.
Oh, sorry, yes. No, it's simply that David Van Ness must have felt that these actions were so meritorious that he should bring it to my knowledge, and having brought it to my knowledge, it would have been bizarre to have said, please tell these officers I'm ungrateful, or some comment other than to endorse the congratulations. But with the power of hindsight, I suspect that the SDS, that the broader question is, when I say I wanted the right people doing the right things in the right way, clearly SDS was not the right people doing the right things in the right way. And I suspect that there was an element of self-justification as well as self-deployment and that may have led to the generation of this note. But I believe David Vaness will be giving evidence, and so you'll be able to ask him directly. But this is, I guess, David Vaness, having received it, felt that he would bring it to my notice.
I'm going to come back to this issue in a little while in relation to another document, but what I'm beginning to drive at here is to explore the SDS's internal PR machine. And what I'm trying to calibrate is whether this is exceptionally good internal PR, getting it to your desk, or whether it's routine.
Yeah. I mean, from what I now know, had I had even a scintilla of knowledge of some of the things which have been exposed here, I would have challenged the very raison d'etre for the continuation of this unit. And I suspect they themselves, or those in the more junior chain of command, must have feared that. They will have been aware of the action I'd taken in relation to other units and people within the force. And I suspect you're absolutely right. This is as well as self-deployment, this is self-aggrandizement.
Now, if we could take that down, if we have up 36845, please. We're moving to April 1997, and there'd been a very large demonstration on the 12th. This is a letter from the Met to the Terrorism and Protection Unit within the Home Office. And if we go over the page, so I can show you who's written it. It's written by a detective superintendent who we have granted anonymity to, yes. TN 61. And if we go back to the first page, give you a moment to read the body of the text.
Yes, I've read that, thank you.
It is fair to say on this occasion the SDS did have a source right in the middle of Reclaim the Streets. Its undercover police officer was a member of the core organising group, and he did provide very accurate intelligence in advance of RTS's undisclosed plans to occupy a building in Marsham Street, the old Department for the Environment buildings. Is it right that the intelligence was passed to you?
No, I again, unless I'm having a serious failure of memory, even within, and I say I'm not being arrogant, but within a fairly prodigious workload, I would have thought that would have registered, and it doesn't. That just doesn't stimulate any memories at all of that event.
And it may now be a redundant question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Can you recall speaking to the Home Secretary about plans by protesters to occupy the Department of Environment buildings in Marsham Street?
No, I can't, and if I had discussed it, I would remember it.
Can we take that down now, please? Can we have up 527564? And if we go to the next page, this is a file including the minute sheets and then the SDS annual report for the year 1996-1997. I'm going to take you through it in a moment because this is an occasion where we do have written evidence to suggest that you did see this annual report.
Yeah, I think this was the one occasion, I believe, where the annual report was brought to my notice.
Yeah. And the reason I'm pausing was for exactly that. Are you sure you have no recollection of seeing any other SDS annual report?
No, I mean, I'm not saying that I didn't, but I'm pretty confident that this must have been an exception. But I say, if my memory is wrong, I will acknowledge that. I'm not seeking to be evasive. If I had memory of them, I would, as I'm under oath to tell you, I would tell you.
Understood. Can we have page 4, please? And we see 2/3 of the way down the page at minute 4, your signature,
Yes.
Conveying your appreciation to all concerned for
Yes.
another year of outstanding courage and professionalism. When you say another year of outstanding courage and professionalism, is that on the basis that you knew about the unit from Welling in 93 and you had dealt with 2 commendations for officers since then?
I think it's just a factual statement that 1997 was not the only year, or 1996, that the world existed. And by then I realised that SDS was a unit that had existed for some time.
And you'd seen the document?
So it's merely an acknowledgement that, it's just what it is, what it says. I'm saying thank you for another good year of work.
I see.
But it's not in any way some mysterious clue that I must have seen other reports. Reports.
I'd encourage you not to be so suspicious of my questions, Lord Condon. What I'm driving at...
I'm not suspicious, I'm trying to be helpful, but transparency to me in your questioning help me give you honest answers.
What I'm driving at is the context in which this report hits your desk. And what I'm suggesting to you...
I honestly believe that was the only occasion that I saw an annual report.
And the context in which it hits your desk
is not self-aggrandizement, but... a passing up the chain, look, we've had a good year.
And several years of good news stories reaching your ears from the SDS.
Yes.
If we go to page 7, please. This is the report itself. And if we go to page 9. And paragraph... this is the introduction. I'll give you a moment to skim it, but what I'm interested in is paragraph 1.5.
Yes, I've read that, thank you.
You would have read this report at the time, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would hope so, yes.
So if we look at 1.5, currently 30% of the unit's operational personnel are employed exclusively or predominantly in public order-related fields. The requirement for intelligence of criminal activity motivated by or associated with ideological or political movements is dealt with by 50% deployment. Did this ring any alarm bells?
No, it didn't. You are quite properly looking at that through the lens of the hindsight, retrospective lens of knowing that this was a unit that did bad things. I would have been looking at it through the lens of not had any alarm bells rung at the time, either by the external Inspectorate of Constabulary or our own internal inspectorate or any individual whistleblower or senior officer or anyone raising concerns. I would have been reading it in the context of someone who had highly commended what I thought were two courageous officers. And I was reading what I thought was an annual report of a well-regarded, properly supervised and ethically supervised unit. And so my mindset, I had many issues where I had serious doubts about corruption and bad behaviour and appalling behaviour by police officers. At this time, at that stage of my commissionership, no alarm bells had been rung in relation to this unit. So I would have read it probably relatively quickly, not because I was not interested or in it, but against the background of having no reason at that stage to have any doubts about the integrity or the supervision or the tradecraft or the operating framework of this unit.
Understood. And we've been through the circumstance in which this hits your desk. But even at the time, you would have known that evidential undercover deployments have more rigour and more safeguards, don't they?
Yes.
And this is telling you that by this point in time, the SDS is spending half of its resources on long-term evidential criminal intelligence gathering. And that means deployments without those rigorous safeguards, deployed not at public order, but against crime.
Yes.
And wouldn't that, if you'd thought about it, have given rise to questions?
No. Totally. An emphatic no. That is such... I won't say the word ignorance of, because that's pejorative and I don't mean to be rude, but in the real world of minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, serious policing judgments that can lead to the life or death of members of the public and or police officers. And I had 7 police officers murdered during my time. That sort of mental extrapolation and mental gymnastics, I believe, is far-fetched.
If we could go now, please, to page 11 and paragraph 4.1. This is singing the praises of the deployment into the RTS, and in particular thwarting a stunt at the Queen Elizabeth Bridge, the Dartford crossing.
Yes.
It seems to conjure up images of exploding fuel tankers.
Yes.
Did you take this at face value, or were you at all sceptical about it?
I don't remember reading that or being aware of it, so I can't express a judgment.
If I put it this way, environmental protesters are very unlikely to have wanted to plan a stunt which gave rise to a very high risk of an outbreak of fire with a fuel tanker, aren't they?
I'm not in a position to say without the knowledge at the time or intelligence.
If we go to page 14, please, paragraph 8.2. This is a section about the extreme left, and this is, first of all, dealing with the drop in interest in counter-subversion. And rather, as you've been saying, it confirms that the police interest, its residual interest, was essentially from public order perspectives.
Yes, yes, and we because of our role and our statutory duties, we couldn't be sanguine in the way that security services could be.
If we go to 8.3, please. Give you a moment to read that, but it's effectively to the effect that the Socialist Workers' Party was not active on the streets at the time.
Yes.
If we go to the next paragraph, give you a moment to read it, but it appears to be to the effect that the SDS may review continuing deployment into the SWP.
Yes, I've read that, thank you.
So the SDS has got a long-term officer infiltrating a political party which is neither a threat to the state nor currently involved in disorder. Shouldn't that have rung alarm bells?
In a perfect world, with no other issues to consider and to spend hours agonising over, it may have triggered such a thought. But in the real world, no, it didn't.
So I'm close to the end of this topic. May I run till about 5 past?
Of course.
If we have 8.5, please. Militant Labour, now renamed the Socialist Party, was targeted throughout the year by one SDS officer. He's now coming to the end of his operational tour. I'll leave you to read the rest of that, but would you agree with the proposition that this amounts to saying the Socialist Party was committed to the electoral process, it was standing candidates, and it was largely absorbed in its own internal affairs?
Yes, I've read that, thank you.
So again, it amounts to telling you that the SDS has a long-term undercover officer deployed into another political party, which does
Sorry,
not...
can I just stop, Mr. Barker? Remind me again the the overall document we're now referring to. I've sort of lost my train of thought.
It's the SDS annual report.
We're still on the annual
yes,
report.
for 1996
Thank you, I do
to 97.
apologise for...
So essentially you're being told here...
I mean, you're assuming that I had read every word and every paragraph and had the luxury of hours, if not more, to consider this document about a unit that at the time I believed was properly supervised and tasked and had no reason to believe otherwise, and had commended officers for bravery. The forensic examination of every word and nuance that you have the luxury of doing quite properly was not one afforded to me, or would have triggered the sort of thought processes which quite properly you are exploring with me. So in the reality of who I was, what I was doing, my time management, the scrutiny you are giving to this document is something which neither I had the luxury to do or can remember doing in the way that you are now doing.
Well, that saves me putting some more examples, but it does take me to the standing back to the bigger point. This is a very positive report about the SDS, and it's part of a long line...
We know that we now know they were blowing their own trumpet.
A long line of positive news. Were you alive as Commissioner to the fact that your internal units would wish to put the best gloss possible on what was being communicated to you?
Yes.
And when you have got people in a long-term undercover role, I think borrowing from your own witness statement, people with a lot of opportunity to misbehave, doesn't that call for a high level of scrutiny?
With retrospect, the supervision that I believed in place clearly was not. And that's why I say I think the greater evil here in all of this is the failure of the Metropolitan Police over decades to put in place adequate framework of tasking, supervision, guidance, inspection, review. But at the time, I erroneously believed that those issues were in place. And I erroneously believed that Special Branch and those within Special Branch were doing the very things which you and I are exploring.
What was the basis for that belief?
Because that is, the police service is a hierarchical organisation. It's a disciplinary body. It's not unlike the military in some respects. People are expected, I take it as read, that the hierarchy of compliance, all officers will comply with the law. All officers will comply with disciplinary regulations. All officers will comply with best practice and guidance from whichever body is appropriate. And the whole supervision chain is about that. So the start point should be that all of those issues are taking place. That is then reinforced by inspection, challenge, supervision, rotation of management. And at that point, I did not have the thoughts that you are triggering with me now and which have been triggered throughout the inquiry. I did not have then, because of the dozens and beyond of significant challenges and problems I was dealing with. No alarm bells had been signalled in my office to lead me to take the sort of action or analysis. I wish I had. If I'd known, I would have intervened.
Can I take it from that answer that you didn't yourself cause any inquiries to be made about the level and rigour of supervision of this unit?
I had no reason to, and nor would the Commissioner routinely do so. The vehicles that did that, I'm aware that the external and independent Chief Inspector of Constabulary had inspected Special Branch in 93, 94, and again in 99. And that was a rigorous root and branch inspection of Special Branch, and no issues had been brought to my attention around either deployment or supervision or ethical behaviour or lack of it. And that would have been the most rigorous of inspections, but clearly failed. So, no, the framework for inspection and intervention was in place. Had I had any inkling of the appalling behaviour that this inquiry is looking into, I would have very, very robustly intervened.
So is that a convenient moment to break for lunch?
Certainly. I think your estimate of 5 minutes was a little short.
The barrister's 5 minutes, I'm sorry.
That's my fault, not his.
We'll resume at 10 past.